As I said this morning, I felt like tonight would be a good night for us to talk about leadership, and not from the perspective of necessarily being appointed in an office, but just what leadership is about and who it is that God can actually use as being a leader. Joshua is a really good example of this because as it begins in the first chapter here in verse 1, it says that when the Lord spoke to Joshua the son of Nun, he calls him Moses' assistant. And many times when you read about Joshua, that's how he's described. He's described as an assistant, a servant, someone who is there with Moses as Moses is leading the people. And so not only did he have someone that he could follow the example of and a good mentor, but Joshua had the right kind of heart and disposition for that job as well. You may not be able to hold an office in the church. Not all the men in this congregation are going to be elders or deacons one day. The women in the congregation, it may not be that you're the wife of an elder or a deacon one day. It may not be that you're going to be one of the more prominent roles that we sometimes exalt within the church. But it doesn't mean that you're not a leader. There are characteristics that inherently make you a leader. It's those kinds of things that make you an example that others would aspire to live to and to be. And so even a person that has a very quiet disposition and a person who can do things very humbly and almost behind the scenes is still a leader and a very effective leader in the Lord's kingdom. There are a lot of people that we do point to and wish we could be like. Even when you go through the scriptures, you look at someone like Paul and say, I wish that I had the kind of faith that Paul had. I wish I could be the kind of leader that Paul was. Or when you look at some of the ones who are not so very good at being a leader, some of the kings of Israel in the Old Testament, you begin to think, I hope I never lead like that if I do find myself to be a leader. And we almost set up this standard that's not only unrealistic, but it's unattainable. It's almost like our women in the congregation that every year we may talk about Proverbs 31 and the virtuous woman and say, can a woman ever attain to being as perfect as that godly woman was? But what God has always been looking for is someone who is willing to have the spirit of leadership that He can use. It's someone who is willing to yield to Him. When you think about the situation that Joshua found himself in, he was put into impossible shoes to fill. That you had Moses leading the people of Israel for a long period of time. And now after 40 years of them wandering and growing weary in the wilderness, now it's time to actually go into the promised land, to take possession of it, to divide the land up the way that God intended for it to be divided. And these people are no longer going to have the one that was the symbol of God being God's mouthpiece, Moses, with them anymore. I don't know that I would have wanted to step into Joshua's position, to have to do what Joshua had to do. And I'm not sure that Joshua was ever asked if he wanted to be this person. But it seems like he was made ready by it, and God's the one who looked down upon him and chose him. I'm sure Mary, the mother of Jesus, did not see herself as being the kind of person who could raise the Messiah and have the Son of God in her home. To imagine as she's saying her prayers at night that God is actually in the next room. And then she's responsible for raising him. But she was chosen. And she was blessed among women because of that. So tonight, what I really hope is that as we go through this, and we're not going to be bringing up anything that's particularly new or anything, but as we go through it, really ask yourself, do I have those kind of qualities that can make me a good leader? A leader within the Lord's church, a leader within your home, the place where you work. It's about being a good example. And just ask yourself if these are some of the traits that you can have and develop. And are you working on them as well? So with that in mind, if you have your notebooks ready, let's see those held up real high if we get the 3 words. All right, very cool. Here's your 3 words. 3 words are humility, faith, and obedience. Because as I said, being a leader is not really about position. Some people are put in positions of leadership, but they're not leaders. Leadership is really about being humble. It's about having faith. It's about being obedient. And we're going to flesh these out as we go through the lesson, but those are the key terms. And so again, I would ask that you evaluate yourself and ask yourself, am I humble? Is humility a problem for me? I see some wives looking at their husbands saying, yes, it is. But humility is one of those things that, yes, it is difficult to work at. But that's one of the things we're supposed to have faith. Not faith in ourselves, because one of the tragic failures of leadership is when we have too much faith and too much confidence in ourselves. As Christians, our leadership capabilities come from the power which God provides, and that's provided to us and accessed by faith. Even when you think about the armor of God that Paul talks about in Ephesians chapter 6, that as he goes through each one of those pieces of armor, every one of them is obtained and utilized by faithful obedience to what God has said. Obedience is a very key term. It is downplayed so much, but as leaders, you have to be obedient to someone else. You can't go outside of being obedient. You can't go rogue, as they say. You can't be a maverick, as they say. It's about being obedient, submissive, humble, and faithful to what God has given to us. So we're going to be looking at Joshua tonight and see how these qualities that he had are what God can truly use as spiritual leaders in his kingdom. So first off, Joshua was one who was led by faith. In Joshua chapter 1 again, let's go back to Joshua chapter 1 and notice verse 3. God tells Joshua that every place that the sole of your foot will tread upon, I have given you, as I said to Moses. And so even from the very beginning, when you think about being led by faith, Moses did not go into the promised land, but he was told that he was going to be able to, until he had his error with striking the rock instead of speaking to it as he was supposed to. And then God told him he was not going to go into the land. But he tells him that just as I told Moses, that wherever it is that you step, this is the land that I'm going to give to you. You can imagine how, even though he's being told by God something that's going to take place and be given to him as if it's already accomplished, that there's going to be some stipulations that's attached to it. In verse 6, you see, be strong and of good courage, for to this people you shall divide as an inheritance the land which I swore to their fathers to give them. And so this lineage of faith that Joshua was going to have to play a huge role in was something that stretched back way before Moses, even to the forefathers of the people of Israel. In Numbers chapter 14, though, you see that what had happened earlier, and this had to be something that would have been upon his mind, that in Numbers chapter 14, it's really chapter 13 and 14, that as they're coming to the promised land the first time, 40 years earlier, that they go into there, they spy it out. You have the 12 spies that go in. You remember that the 10 spies come back, and they give a report that this land is as God said it would be. It is a land that is flowing with milk and honey. But also there are great giants in this land, and there are great fortified cities and walls, and we're not able to take it. And in chapter 14, verses 6 through 9, Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had spied out the land, tore their clothes. And they spoke to all the congregation of the children of Israel, saying, the land we passed through to spy out is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord delights in us, then he will bring us into this land, and will give it to us, the land which flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord, nor fear the people of the land, for they are our bread. Their protection has departed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them. Verse 10, it says, so the people looked to stone them after they were saying this thing. And so when Joshua is leading the people by faith, it is not a blind faith. It is not a kind of faith that just says, well, God, you're going to take care of everything and I don't have to do anything. Joshua understands that for him to lead the people as he's supposed to, then he's going to have to not make the same kind of mistake that even Moses had made. And that as he leads this people into this land, he's going to have to be accountable for making sure these people are living the way that they're supposed to be living. And he's not supposed to be just the kind of person that he himself is strong and courageous, excuse me, but that he can instill this kind of courage in the hearts and minds of the people themselves. Because it's not just about him, but it's about him leading other people in this direction. And that is not going to be easy, because he has met these things and he's seen these challenges even in the past. In Joshua chapter 6, when they get into Canaan and they face the walls of Jericho, you can imagine how scary that may have been. This morning we pointed out how it was that right before this they were going to cross the Jordan. And when they crossed the Jordan, it was the ones that were selected to carry the Ark of the Covenant. And as they're walking toward the water's not parted yet, but they're walking toward it. And they have to know that God is going to do what God says he's going to do. And it's not until they actually put their feet in the water that it begins to part. Joshua has been witnessing and seeing these kinds of things throughout his life. And now when they reach this place, God gives them this very strange way of taking the city, to march around it for several days. And then to keep silent while you're doing that. And at the end of those days, to make this great noise, and the wall's going to fall down, and that God's going to deliver this great walled city, this thing that 40 years earlier the people were not willing to go into the land because of this kind of thing. And Joshua has to tell them, we are going to take it. These people are our bread, like I said to you, but this is how we're going to do it. We're just going to march around it for several days. And you can just imagine how silly that may have sounded to some. And yet you can see that the people's resolve had changed so much over those past 40 years. And now Joshua is leading a people in that city who are willing to do the very thing that God has directed them to do. That kind of faithfulness does not come overnight. It is something that comes upon us and is forged by trials and temptations and struggles along the way. But it teaches us that when we have faith in God, God always delivers. It's interesting that in Hebrews 11 and verse 30 it says, by faith the walls of Jericho fell down. It's by faith that those walls fell down, and they were encircled for 7 days. So here's the first lesson about leadership. Leaders have to be led by trusting God's word, not popular opinion or by human reasoning. And there's a lot of that can interfere. It messes with your mind big time. That back, several years ago when we were dealing with the pandemic and all those things, you look at that and there's a lot of human reasoning that says why we should not do this and why we should do something else. And for us, we have to be leaders in God's kingdom, not earthly kingdoms. And for us, we have to make decisions what's based solely upon what's best for the soul of the brethren. And people can make their decisions when it comes to their physical health. But our line of expertise is the soul. Well, people didn't like that. That wasn't acceptable to a lot. There was things that we as the leaders of this congregation had to struggle with. There were brethren that had to struggle with a lot of things. It's not an easy time. But what are we supposed to listen to? What makes for a good godly leader? And that's congregation. What about in your family? There's times where things don't make sense, where what you may decide for your family, or whether or not your kids attend certain events that the school puts on. That's probably not the best thing for a Christian to be doing. Well, that's not going to be popular. Your own kids aren't going to like it. And they're probably going to get mad at you and call you names and everything else. But what are you supposed to do? A leader is guided by faith. Do you have faith that the decisions I make now are going to be decisions that are going to have the kind of consequences that are the most consequential for their good, as opposed to what makes them feel good now, and if it goes bad later, then we'll deal with that? How's our life going to be led? Joshua chose to lead by the way in which God told him to do then, and didn't go by human reasoning or opinions that people might have to the contrary. He was also somebody, as I said, that was very, very obedient to what it was that God told him to do. In Joshua 1, again, verses 7 and 8, that was read for us a little bit earlier, notice what God tells him that he needs to be about doing. This is the command that God gives him. Verses 7 and 8 again, he says, only be strong and very courageous, that you may observe to do all according to the law which Moses my servant commanded you. Do not turn from it to the right hand or to the left, that you may prosper wherever you go. The book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate in it day and night, that you may observe to do according to all that is written in it. For then you will make your way very prosperous, and then you will have good success. God told him that the reason that he's given these commandments is so that he may be careful to observe them, and not to turn to the left hand or to the right. That every command that God had given to Joshua, from the crossing of the Jordan in chapters 3 and 4 to the dividing of the land in several chapters later, Joshua was very faithful in making sure that he was obeying God's commands precisely. But one thing that we understand also is that does not mean you're always going to be perfect. And often as leaders, what's expected of those in leadership positions, you never make a mistake. You never do anything wrong. You never make the wrong decision or choose the wrong path. And that's just not realistic at all. Even with someone like Joshua. Look at Joshua chapter 9. This morning in our study, we looked at Joshua 10, where he comes to the rescue of the Gibeonites. And God has the sun and the moon stand still. That day lasts for so long so that the victory can be completely won by God. But the thing that got them into trouble to begin with is in chapter 9. The Gibeonites were a group of people who heard that the Israelites were coming through, what had happened with the other kings, and they became afraid of the Israelites as a result. And so what they did is they made their clothes, and they even aged their food and made it look like they were from a long distance away. And they go to the leaders of the tribes, and they say that, we've come because we've heard how great and strong and powerful you are. Look at our clothes, look at our food, and see how long of a journey we've been on. Please make a covenant with us, a treaty with us, that you will not attack us, that you will not kill us, because you are much stronger and mightier than we. And the leaders make that covenant. But if you look there in chapter 9 and verse 14, it says, Then the men of Israel took some of their provisions, but they did not ask counsel of the Lord. They did not first find out, is this the thing that we ought to be doing? Should we be making a covenant with these people or not? Well, then they come to find out that these people are not from a faraway land. They're actually neighbors there. They're part of the ones that are supposed to be dispelled from the land, and yet they've made a covenant now with them. So they found themselves in a troublesome situation because they did not consult with God first. Now, even when you see Joshua, and Joshua is a party to all these things that are happening, chapter 11 and verse 15, it says of Joshua that as the Lord had commanded Moses his servant, so Moses commanded Joshua, and Joshua did. He left nothing undone of all that the Lord had commanded Moses. That Joshua was a man that was doing to the best of his ability and was striving to be what God would have him to be and to do what God had commanded him to do. But he did not do it perfectly. No leader is perfect. If the thing that is causing you to fear being a leader is because you know you're not perfect, well, join the club. No one else is either. No leader is perfect. You can remember back in Joshua chapter 7 that earlier when they go into Canaan, one of the things that's told them when they go into the land is to make sure that nothing is taken from the land. But you have Achan, who takes some of the choice materials from the land and hides them in his tent. And they're defeated at this little town of Ai. And Joshua doesn't know what's going on. And so Joshua actually goes to God and he prays to God. Joshua 7 verse 7. Joshua says, Alas, Lord God, why have you brought us this people over the Jordan at all to deliver us into the hand of the Amorites to destroy us? Oh, that we had been content and dwell on the other side of the Jordan. Oh Lord, what shall I say when Israel turns its back before its enemies? For the Canaanites and all the inhabitants of the land will hear it and surround us and cut off your name from the earth. Then what will you do for your great name? And God lets Joshua know very quickly that my name is not about reputation. My name is about righteousness. And he even tells Joshua in the next verse, verse 10, So the Lord said to Joshua, Get up, why do you lie thus on your face? Israel has sinned. He's letting Joshua know there is a time to pray, and this ain't it. Why are you praying to me? And this prayer is one that you can read many times in the Scriptures. What are you going to do now? What will people say about your name and this great people? This is a prayer that he's heard Moses utter, because Moses used this in talking to God many times. But God tells him, this is not the time for you to be praying, Joshua. This is time for you to get up and start dealing with the sin in the camp. There's a time to be talking to God and asking God for his blessings and things. But God also lets us know there's also times that you need to be about obeying. Joshua is no longer accountable just for himself. Joshua also had to make sure that the camp stayed pure, some accountability. That's not always easy. How was Joshua, after all, going to know that Achan had stolen these things from the land and had hid them in his tent? There's no way for Joshua to know that. But even though it was going on, it still cost many people their lives. It made Joshua feel like he was defeated and something was wrong even with him. Leadership is about obedience, but you're not going to be perfect. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to make decisions that are not the wisest. You're going to make decisions based on the information that you have, and people are going to withhold information from you when they're wanting a decision made about something. That's what happens. But what is it about truly for us? It means we obey. What has God told us to do? He's told us to obey. That yes, I can pray for my brethren, and I can pray for those who are having some difficulties and hardships, but until we actually get up and start doing something about that, all we're doing is praying. And here God says, why are you lying thus on your face? Israel has sinned. And so sometimes those decisions that are made are going to be hard, they're going to be difficult decisions, but we have to consult God first, not after. We need to make sure that we're doing what God wants us to do from the beginning. and not wait till the end to see how it turns out. 2 Timothy 3:16 and 17. Again, what God told Joshua to do was not let this book depart. Meditate on it day and night. In the New Testament, we're told all Scripture is given by inspiration of God and is profitable for doctrine. Joshua had the doctrine. It's also profitable for reproof. It tells you where it is that you've messed up, where you have missed the mark that the doctrine laid out. For correction, how do you make it right again? Instruction in righteousness, how do you make sure you never repeat that mistake? That's the thing that says that the man of God can be complete and thoroughly equipped for every good work. So here's the lesson for this point, is that leaders have to be guided by the Scripture, not tradition, not emotion. It has to be guided by the Scriptures. If God had them defeated at Ai, there was something about it, and it was not because God was worried about the reputation of His name. God's name has always been about righteousness. Unless His name is exalted as being a righteous name, the reputation doesn't matter. Because there's a lot of people even now that may fear the name of God in a lot of ways, but they do not practice righteousness. Leaders are those kind that know what it is that God has to say, and they do it. They do it. Even when people don't like it, even when people disagree with it, even when popular opinion is against it, even when you're all by yourself like Joshua and Caleb was. You can remember the things that Caleb said, that as they were entering into this promised land, Caleb said, it's been a long time I've been waiting for this mountain. That if you remember right, me and Joshua told you all not to do this thing and rebel against God 40 years ago, and you didn't listen to him. Now, I'm 80 years old now, but I'm just as strong today as I was back then to take this mountain. And I believe Caleb was telling the truth. I don't know what he looked like, but I suspect Caleb was a rough-looking character and meant what he said. He was willing to do it. Joshua was a leader that put God first in all that he did, even when he made mistakes. He had courage. And being a leader means that you're going to have enough courage to face the challenges and have the strength that your confidence in God is going to be enough. That Joshua was the kind of leader. In Joshua 1 and verse 9, once again, we have that passage, be strong and of good courage. It's what God had commanded him to do and to be. But let's look at Deuteronomy chapter 31, verses 7 and 8. Deuteronomy 31, verses 7 and 8. This is as Moses is about to be taken by God because he's not going into the promised land. He says, Then Moses called Joshua, and he said to him in the sight of all Israel, Be strong and of good courage, for you must go with this people to the land which the Lord has sworn to their fathers to give them, and you shall cause them to inherit it. And the Lord said, He is the one who goes before you. He will be with you. He will not leave you nor forsake you. Do not fear, nor be dismayed. Moses says this to him, and Moses says it in front of the people. God says it, that he's going to be with him, and tells him, don't be afraid, be of good courage. I think the reason that God told him to not be afraid is because there's going to be a lot of things to make you afraid. To be of good courage because you're going to need some courage. Because courage is not the absence of fear. It is having the fortitude to face the fears and do what is right regardless of the fear that we may have. That is not something that is just comes about naturally to most people. And it's something that a lot of people actually try to avoid. But as leaders, we can't. As leaders in your home, you can't. As being leaders in the place where you work, you can't. You're a Christian. The Lord is our light. He is our salvation. Whom shall we fear? Of whom shall we be afraid? He's the light of my life. And so when we have that kind of attitude, that's the kind of attitude that Joshua was commanded to have. In chapter 8, you see it playing out. And this is one of the key elements of leadership. Joshua chapter 8, verses 10 and 11. This is as they're about to go into war with Ai. And it says that Joshua rose up early in the morning and mustered all the people and went up, he and the elders of Israel, before the people to Ai. And all the people of war who were with him went up and drew near, and they came before the city and camped at the north side of Ai. And there was a valley that lay between them. One of the things you should see about Joshua is he was not willing to send other people where he himself was not willing to go first. That when they were going out to press the battle, it was going to be Joshua who was going to be out there in the lead fighting the battle. That's what he's supposed to do. That's what courage is about. If I'm leading others, I have to be the first one to face the fire. That in the home, that's the way it's got to be. It's in a place of work, that's the way it's got to be. If it's in the church, that's the way it's got to be. That leaders are the ones that are willing to do what is necessary and be the first ones to do it. To not sacrifice pawns, as it were, within a congregation first. And you've probably all seen things like that. It's why Satan tries to divide congregations. When he tries to divide people along different party lines to this individual or that preacher, some other preacher, because they're not loyal to the one true leader, and that's our God. But when we think about who we are, we have to be willing to fight that fight. Not to stir someone else up to fight that fight. I'm going to fight that fight. If this is wrong, I'm going to say it's wrong. If it's right, I'm going to say it's right. And I'm going to stand where God wants us to stand. That's the kind of attitude that Joshua was having when he was leading these people, because God told him, you be strong, you be courageous, you do what is necessary to lead this people and to divide it. In the New Testament, we're told in 1 Corinthians 16, verses 13 to 14, to watch, stand fast in the faith, be brave, be strong, let all that you do be done with love. Paul's words echo the same sentiment that you see in the life of Joshua. And so it leads us to the point of that leading with courage means standing firm in truth, even when it's unpopular. And it's going to be. We know we live in that world where the truth is unpopular. We see it all around us that it's unpopular. Just the most simple and basics of truths are things that people deny the existence of. And that each person can define for themselves what the word truth actually is. And what is actually truth in a world that is turned upside down by it. And so when you think about being a leader, it just means having enough courage to say, no, that's not true. That's not right. But no, we're not going to do that. I know this is something all your friends are doing. But as for this household, we serve God. And yes, you're going to be unpopular, and yes, people are going to call you names, and people are going to pick on you. So what? We're not ruled by emotions. We have the courage to stand firm on the truth. And again, it's not something that's gained overnight. Where are you on these things? How good a job are you doing with them? Is this something that you're perpetuating in your home for the next generation? Because all of us can bemoan the fact that things seem to be getting a lot worse in the world around us. And we wish that someone would do something about it. We need more people like Joshua. Joshua doesn't seem to be somebody who was chosen because he was extremely charismatic. And Joshua wasn't in that position because it seemed to be a position he was seeking after. And it's like, well, as soon as Moses dies, then I can fill that position, fill that office. Because as I said at the beginning, leadership is not about position. It's about humility. It's about courage. It's about faith. What it ultimately is about submission to God's will. That's what leadership is. And that's something I believe that every one of us is capable of. And there may be different areas where we have talents and abilities that are different from one another. Yes, and so be it, and God be glorified as a result of it. But leadership is about submission to God's will. Pure and simple. And so lastly, he was somebody who led, or not almost lastly, rather, he's somebody who led with humility and with service. Because if somebody is wanting to be a leader, they have to first be that servant. In Exodus 24 and verse 13, it's one of the things that is said about him is that he is Moses' servant. He's his attendant. And somebody that is there, even when Moses goes back to be in his own tent, Joshua stays by the tabernacle to guard it. And Joshua's life was filled with being that kind of servant, even to his own people. And these are the kinds of people that Jesus often chooses. In Matthew 23, 11 and 12, Jesus said, he who is greatest among you shall be your servant, and whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. And so it's the person who is willing to be the servant of other people. You know, if some of you men in the audience, if you're seeking to one day be an elder, one of the things that it says that if someone who desires the office of an elder desires a good, what's the next word? Work. The Bible even says that it's a work that you engage in. You're supposed to be a servant. Deacon. What does the term mean? Servant. Minister. Where we usually don't use for the preacher, but minister. What's the word mean? Servant. What is each one of us supposed to, what are we called to do? Remember when Jesus is washing the feet of his disciples and he says, what I've done to you, this is what you're supposed to do to one another. By the love that you have for one another, the world will know that you are my disciples. Servants. The whole kingdom is filled with servants. Joshua was chosen to be a leader because he was well equipped to be a servant. A servant is someone who is not usually so prideful and arrogant that he thinks somebody else ought to do it. That I'm too high, I'm too important to do that job because they're a servant. You can remember in the story of Naaman, the leper, that when he goes to see the prophet, he's upset, remember, because he thought the prophet was going to come out and speak these great words and wave his hand over the leprosy, and the leprosy is going to be healed. Instead, he tells him to go wash in the Jordan. He says, that filthy river, there's tons of other rivers I could wash in other than that filthy Jordan River. And you remember who it is who talks to him? His servant. And his servant says, my Lord, if I told you to do something great, you would have done it. So why not do something that's very simple, very easy? Go wash in the Jordan and be healed. And so he goes and dips in the Jordan and he's healed. But it was his servant that had to tell him that. Brethren, we're called to service to others. It's what we're supposed to be known for. And it's who it is that God is looking to exalt, even as he did with Joshua. And you can see the effects of it. Go to Joshua toward the end of this letter, this book. Joshua 23 and verse 3. Because Joshua kept encouraging the other people. He says, you have seen all that the Lord your God has done to all these nations. That even after Joshua had been leading the people for this long period of time, he was not willing to even take the credit for himself. But he says, you see what the Lord your God has done to all these nations because of you. Not because of me, because of you. For the Lord your God is he who has fought for you. In verses 9 and 10 of that same chapter, for the Lord has driven out from before you great and strong nations. But as for you, no one has been able to stand against you to this day. One man of you shall chase 1,000. For the Lord your God is he who fights for you, as he has promised you. In chapter 24 and verse 15, he reminds them again that if it seems evil to you to serve the Lord, then choose for yourselves who you're going to serve. As for me and my house, he says, we're going to serve the Lord. But in between those two things, he says, think about this. Go back and serve maybe the gods of your fathers, the ones they served on the other side of the river, or the gods of the Amorites. And then he reminds them, in whose land you now dwell. So he says, you want to serve a God that's not real, that's been defeated? Well, you can do that. That's your choice. But the way in which Joshua had served them was by letting them know that God was doing this. He always pointed back to that. That's what the humility and service is all about. It's not that we're so great, that we're so open-hearted, that we're so tender-hearted, that we're so loving. It's not any of that. It's because of who we are, because of our God. We don't seek the glory. We seek the glory that belongs to him. Philippians 2, 3 through 5, we were reminded of this context this morning around the table. Let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem others better than himself. Let each of you look out not only for his own interest, but also for the interest of others. And let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus. It is about humble service to our God. Best leaders are servants first. If you want to be able to be effective as a leader in the Lord's kingdom, be a servant. Don't look to try to get a position, to gain prominence. Be a servant. Serve someone. Serve someone this week. We had a lady in Alabama that I still admire the memory of. That she was a widowed lady. She lived by herself. She was older, but she was still able to drive. And one of the things she would do is, like on Monday, she would spend all day long cooking meals. Just cooking one meal after another, one meal after another. All these things out of her garden or whatever it was she was going to cook. Because Tuesday she took it around to the other widow ladies in the congregation to see them and to check on them. She would have taken them to lunch, but one of the other widow ladies says, yes, she can drive, but I don't trust her driving. But they did trust her cooking, and I had her cooking, and it was worth trusting. It was good. She was never somebody of great prominence. She was like a Dorcas. You know, she was making the garments, the tunics, that others would come in and say, look at what she did. Because she was humble. She did what she could. Remember the woman who breaks the flask of oil? She has done what she could. The widow with the 2 mites, she's put in everything. it's that type of service that we're talking about. That's the kind of service, that's the kind of leadership that all of us can take part in and be leaders in the Lord's kingdom because of it. He was a leader because he inspired others as well. Again, when you go to Joshua 24, you look at verse 31. Think about this lasting legacy. Israel, just the name, just the land, just the people. When you think about Israel, faithful or unfaithful? That even when you think about Israel, you think about all the different times that they turned their back on God and were unfaithful. Even though God delivered them, even though God was faithful to them, everything that God had blessed them with, over and over again, you think of Israel as being a people who were rebellious. But here it says that Israel served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua, who had known all the work of the Lord which he had done for Israel. And it's sad that when you get to a place where there arose a king who did not know Joseph. And when that happened, it's because the people had forgotten all that had been done in the promises. With Joshua and all the elders that outlived him, what happens? The people started doing what was right in their own eyes instead of heeding the voice of those who had led them in the right paths earlier. And so Joshua said, as for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. And that inspired others. We have that same thing amongst us even now, that we desire that each one of you, the Hebrew writer says, show the same diligence to the full assurance of hope until the end, and that you do not become sluggish, but imitate those who through faith and patience inherit the promises. We have brethren among us that they're not going to be the prominent world renowned. They're not going to be the outspoken speakers, the eloquent writers. They're not going to be that. They're going to be people who through faith and patience inherit the promise. They're going to be people that, even though they're sick, you know where they come? They're still coming to worship. And when they miss worship, it's hard to figure out what day of the week it even is, because it's been that many years since they've missed a day. Why? Because they're seeking an office, or they're seeking the Lord who gives them hope. These are the people that the Bible tells us we're supposed to be imitating. It's nice to be able to have those leaders who are very noticeable and out there in the front, who are leading the charge, leading the battle. But we don't often think about these as being the ones who are leading the battle for us, because this is who our leaders are. These are the ones we're supposed to be following the example of. These are the ones that point us toward heaven, because they're going to inherit the promise. How can I also do that? That's the kind of legacy. Craig talked about it this morning in the announcements about leaving a legacy. This is what that kind of legacy looks like and is supposed to look like. Godly leaders influence, and their influence lasts beyond their lifetime. That we should want our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren to be still walking in faith because of the kind of example that we set, even in our own time. That's some of the things I think that we can learn from Joshua. And that's the kind of leaders, I think, and the kind of leadership talents and abilities, skills, I think all of us can develop. It's not calling upon us to do things that are tremendously heroic or brave, but being brave enough to speak the truth. It's not calling upon us to do those things that are like leading an army into battle, but it is about teaching our children what it means to pray to a God who is above all. It's about giving hope and patience in the midst of a world that tries to rob them of it. That's the kind of leadership that I think we all should be aspiring to. So the question I'm going to leave with you is that, will you be a Joshua in this generation? I have no doubt that most in this congregation are, because I've seen it. And I know there's also something that we all can be if we aspire to it, if we strive to be the kind of leader that Joshua was. I hope this has been encouraging to you. If you have anything that's going on in your life that's preventing you from doing this, if you need to deal with sin, if you need to talk about some particular problem that you're having, if you need to obey the gospel because you've been putting it off, whatever that need may be, don't be hindered tonight. Don't hold on to that pew in front of you so hard that you don't step out and let us know that you need help. If there is something we can help you with, please let us know as we stand and sing.